Julie Golob, I'm so excited to have you on the show today and talk about firearm safety.
I'm excited to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's a fun topic.
Yeah, it is. I love teaching people fundamentals of firearm safety. And I think it's more important to address now than ever. And my view is everyone should have firearm safety. And I'd like to start with that, but would you just take a moment to tell people what you want them to know about yourself, as well as being a great author and advocate for my favorite firearm company?
Well, thank you very much. My name is Julie Golob. I'm a professional competition shooter for a number of different companies in the firearms industry. I am an author as well. But I grew up shooting and learning how to compete and hunt and all of that in upstate New York as a young girl. And it became a passion that went from passion hobby to my job. And I have the best job in the world. So thanks for having me on. It's exciting to be able to share these things with everyone.
Yes. And I'm a city boy that grew up in Washington, D.C. With a very inaccurate and negatively biased view of the field. And a friend I call a smart, good old boy from North Carolina saw me under crushing stress with taking care of my parents remotely and said, "You need to go to the gun range." And I thought, really? And after an hour of it, I went, I didn't worry about my parents for an entire hour. I had a great time. And I really like all the people I met. And that was the change. And that happened like 10 years ago. And I went out to become a concealed carry instructor. I help a deputy sheriff, retired now, on it, and went through the NRA firearm. I do have to say, my competition gun's a Smith & Wesson.
Love to hear it.
And where should people start? And why should they start even if they're either know nothing about firearms or afraid of firearms or even are have a negative view like they're all evil or bad? And, and all those groups to me should have basic firearm safety training.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's like with anything. We learn how to deal with cars, we learn how to deal with knives, we learn how to deal with electricity. All of these things we learn to deal with because the world is potentially dangerous. It's not completely inherently dangerous all the time, but it has the potential to be so. So even if you never have any intention of owning or shooting a firearm, it's really good to know how firearms work and what to do should you come across one, how to be able to manipulate it safely, to put it in a safe condition so that it doesn't harm you or others. And so this is just a standard thing. And you and I are on the same page with this. This is something everyone should know, whether you're a 5-year-old to a 95-year-old. It's a really important topic that education does indeed save lives.
You know, my Aikido instructor years ago, when I was like, I'm 60 plus. And when I was in 24, he said, you don't hear of people who use firearms every day having children that have accidents with firearms. And I'll never forget that. And I said, why? Because they all make sure the kids have firearm safety training. It's intrinsic in the ethics of how they handle it. Now, it doesn't mean there couldn't be an exception, but at least in my lifetime since then, I haven't heard of one. You want to move from ignorance, not knowing, and fear to respect and understanding. Is that an accurate statement?
Completely. When we have little ones, we want to protect them. I'm a mom of 2 girls, so I understand this completely. I don't want them to fall off a tall building because I tell them not to climb up on the roof. I tell them all of these things, like not touching the stove because they could get burned. But I still have the conversation. I have the discussion. And so many people, due to the hot topic nature of guns, choose not to talk about firearms and just place them in this category that makes them intriguing to youngsters or to teenagers. And when that happens, when you aren't there to guide your child or know someone who can guide your child, this is how bad things happen. And so it's really, really important to have those discussions. And as you said, many, many safe, responsible gun owners are out there having these talks with their kids establishing rules about firearms with their children so that it's no longer a taboo. So long as everyone understands what the tool is for, how dangerous it is, what the steps we have to do in order to make it safe and to use it, then everybody's much safer.
Yeah, I think it's so critical because in the last few years, quite a few people I know have chosen to buy a firearm, mainly for personal protection and concerns. And the first thing I say is everyone in the household needs to get firearm safety trained. People say, well, they aren't interested. They don't want to know. They don't know. No, would you have a new piece of equipment that if you used it wrong, it could cut your hand and not make sure everyone in the house at least knew how to be safe around it if you leave it there and what to do? And that's to me a very critical piece, that this is fundamental of I'm going to challenge being a good parent and a good citizen. One thing I learned on a range is that we're all range officers. We're all responsible. That was the first thing John told me. He says, you're responsible first for every bullet that ever leaves your firearm. Never forget that.
Always.
And then he told me the basic safety rules, and we'll make sure we cover those at the end for people. And then from there, he also said, but you're also responsible for everyone on the range. And I thought, I just really learned to appreciate the commitment and safety feel I had that we're all looking out. And that to me is a real commitment. And if you don't know what that looks like, you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't know someone just picked up a firearm and didn't check it. The next piece, since you wrote that wonderful book that everyone should buy on youth learning about firearms, and I looked it up, I realized that I gave it to someone who had young kids. So
that's great. Thank you.
A little bit about that, and we'll make sure the link's below on it. And what's the age and where should you start and so forth? As a parent, I think you'd be excellent explaining it.
Well, thanks. So Toys, Tools, Guns, and Rules is a children's book about gun safety, and it is geared towards younger children. So think 3 to 8, depending on the maturity level of your child, because only you know your child and everybody's a little bit different. But it is geared towards younger children. It teaches the universal message everyone should be teaching. I don't care what organization you belong to, that children should not touch firearms and they should stop and go get an adult should they come across a gun. And so it lays that foundation down. My book goes through a little bit more detail. It gives the dangerous types of the firearms so that kids can learn, again, reducing that taboo that we have when kids are curious and they want to know, I want to pull that trigger. No. And goes through the fundamental safety rules that we've been addressing in this. And the great thing about firearm safety is it is so simple. There are 4 basic rules. These are the foundational rules. And yes, you can go into things further, like, as you mentioned, the specific procedures at the range, how we're going to make sure the firearms are positioned or safe, or so that we know that they're safe, that sort of thing. But at its very core, it's very, very simple. And it's something that even young kids can understand. And so Toys, Tools, Guns, and Rules establishes the difference between toys and firearms, tools and toys, and really kind of narrows it down so that parents can start talking to their kids about guns.
The age as young as possible? Is there, as long as soon as they can talk? What's your vote on specific ages to begin?
I think it just depends on the family. I'm obviously a gun owner. My job is to shoot. Or if you're in a family with a law enforcement officer or that sort of thing, you have guns in your home that are a part of your everyday life. So for that family, it's soon. It's as young as possible so that they begin to understand that you have rules, just like they're not allowed to touch the stove. They're not allowed to touch the firearms in the house. This, partnered with safe storage practices, is the best solution. But if you have a child that's a little less mature or has an attention span difficulty, maybe you don't go over the 4 rules in one session. You just talk about 1 at first, and then you build the foundation. So I think that it doesn't matter how old you are, you should know and understand the safety rules before you go to the range, before you learn how to shoot, whether that's 10, 100, 25, it doesn't matter. And so often we're so interested in getting people hooked on shooting that we don't really talk about that safety aspect. but they're really simple. And once you understand them, it's just something to ingrain, and you just keep going. I mean, I practice, making sure that the gun is clear whenever I'm using it in dry fire. I always treat it as if it is loaded, even when I know that it isn't, even as a professional shooter, because that's what needs to happen in order to make sure that everybody stays safe and that you have a fun time too.
Why don't you go into the 4? We know lots of people know already.
Yeah, no. So the first one, and there's lots of different ways that you can phrase these things. You can get very old school and say Jeff Cooper's, way of saying things is absolutely correct, and I do not disagree with that. I think they're fantastic. But when you're explaining and you're understanding them, you may word them a little differently. But the first one is all guns are always loaded. If you treat your firearm as if it is loaded at all times, then you're less likely to be cavalier with it. There's no flamboyant running around doing crazy things that we see in the movies with firearms that you experience off the range or without people who don't know about firearm safety. We just don't do that. So, it's funny when people talk about their experiences with guns and they go to movies. I mean, gosh, how many times have you watched movies and gone, oh no, he just didn't do that, or oh no, she didn't do that, right? So it's
this
very,
is not
very
a good
important.
way to aim.
No, it is not. but that's why firearm safety is so important. And I'm curious, when you went to your first shooting experience, was that the first time you had been to the range when your friend said, hey, you need to go, or what did you have a foundation beforehand?
No, that was the first time. And
oh wow,
said, before we start, we're going over safety. So
that's fantastic.
I went, well, isn't that going to occur? No, this will be the first thing we do. And he went over safety and he says the rules of the range, and I'm going to kind of walk you through things. So we shared a booth, and then afterwards, the biggest thing I remember is there's 3 things. There's safety, there's the range, and then the managing the firearm.
Right.
And I really connected to people who enjoy motorcycle riding, because they say, I can't daydream and be safe with a motorcycle. On a firearm, it's the same thing. There's no room in your head to do anything but pay attention. It's a very Zen-like uptime experience. And I've meditated for years, and it's really this kind of focus, safety, present piece that it's hard to describe unless you've experienced it.
That's cool. I've never heard of the analogy between motorcycle and shooting. I've ridden on motorcycles. I've never driven motorcycles, but I don't know why we do this. Like when we shoot, we go like this, and then we drive a motorcycle.
But it's that uptime.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You're present, and even people would say, oh, you're shooting, or you visualizing a target. No one visualizes someone on a target. We all take extremely responsible. It's a target, and that's it. So the first one we got out is every firearm is loaded, and that's the piece. So if I were a prop person and handed you a firearm and said it's not loaded, what would you do is, I'll never take their advice.
Right.
A lot of the guys that shoot a lot, some of the pro that have been in a lot of action, even be on video, say they don't. They assume you can see. They check it the moment. You'll see it on the set. Someone will hand it, and they check and make sure it's unloaded every single time. And that's why it's so critical that we get. That's the first one. So if you set it down and then you pick it up, and you set it down again, pick it up, what are you doing? You're checking it another time.
Absolutely.
So that's the first. What's our next one?
Never point your firearm, the muzzle, at anything you don't wish to destroy. And for those who don't know what a muzzle is, that's the end of the gun that the bullet flies out of. And so that's one of the things that I go through in the book, is kind of breaking that down for kids if they don't understand it. But if we treat them as if they're loaded, and we don't point them at anything we don't wish to destroy, automatically we've become so much safer, right? Yeah. Because we are eliminating unsafe actions. As I mentioned before, cavalier gun handling in fun, in jest, or whatever should never happen, because you shouldn't actually put the sights on the target unless it's something you intend to shoot. And it's
John
important.
mentioned something interesting you probably heard before. He goes, imagine there's a laser coming out that can cut through all walls.
Exactly.
And so I'm not even thinking, if I pick it up in the house, okay, I know there's a dirt mound in the house over there. There's no one in that room.
Right.
And so even thinking through the walls as a piece of it is an
Absolutely.
important aspect. And that's something I'm sure you're an advocate as well of, it's like if I pass it by, okay, well, who could be downstairs? All that is fundamental. And if you go into a gun shop, you can see they're doing that. They're thinking about it.
Yeah.
As well. So that's our second one.
That's our second one. Yes. To your point about muzzle direction and that sort of thing, when you watch very, very proficient users who shoot a lot, especially people who may be in tactics, law enforcement, military, they're constantly doing things, being very, very aware of their muzzle at all times. So much that it might look awkward and strange to someone who doesn't know, because why not just go like this, right? Fastest point between A to B, but they're very, very intentional with their muzzle direction at all times. So number 3 is to keep your finger straight and outside of the trigger guard, off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Again, these are all step-by-step incremental things that even if you broke number 1 and number 2, if your finger is straight and off the trigger, the gun should not fire. It will not fire, right? Yeah. So that's a very, very important rule.
Yeah, I think that's so important. It's so easy to spot if someone knows a firearm or not. I can just hear everyone on the range cringing with someone picking up a firearm and slipping that finger in. I don't care if it's downrange. Well, in the competition I've done, that's disqualification.
Of course.
I was taught shoot and then take it off the trigger and move. Even though I'm downrange, I'm going to move with it off the trigger every time. So this is, to me, the first level of safety on a firearm.
Yes.
As well. Excellent. And then our next.
And our last one is always be aware of your target and what is beyond it. This extends that laser rule that you were talking about, in combining muzzle direction, being aware of your muzzle, but what's going to be behind your target. If you're on a range, it's usually a backstop, either it's steel or rubber or dirt, whatever you have. But if you're hunting in the field, you need to know where your bullet is going to go should you decide to shoot. And that's a very important understanding. If you're going to be carrying, whether it's home defense or personal defense, you need to be aware of thinking about what could be beyond the target that you may intend to shoot and whether or not to take that shot, because it has consequences. So there's a big responsibility when it comes to, and this one's sometimes overlooked by a lot of people because they're like, oh, I'm at a range. It's always a safe place for me to shoot, right? But if there's any sort of practical application for your shooting, whether it's personal home defense, hunting, or even if you're competing, there may be just the berm may be lower in some spots. You may want to change where you're aiming on the target just to be safer. These are all things to consider.
This is so important because new people who go to the range, they'll sometimes pull the target a little close. Well, now if they're shooting at the top of the target, guess what? That's going to go through and hit the ceilings. Now, they're called range officers and they're great in my area. They'll be walking right out and stopping your heart.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
But this is a habit that will also keep you safe, because in the horrible situation there was no option. It was the only way to survive or protect your family. You don't want to hit another person. You want it to hit the only person who's trying to kill you. This is why you want to practice that so carefully. And it's another way to know the safety.
Absolutely.
Well, those are the basics. And the next question is, what are good ways for someone who knows nothing about this to discern someone who's a good firearm instructor? Because we've all seen the best. Luckily, I haven't seen many bad ones. I think they're only on YouTube. But
and Instagram.
All the ones I've met are really great. And the big thing is, I'm real sensitive and advocate for women firearm shooters. They learn fast, and it's so important. I've seen it so empowering. So I've gotten sensitive to any environment I think isn't, I'm just going to say it, female friendly, where there's kind of an arrogant, condescending approach to teaching that is so important to not have but firm. So
Mhm.
what would your advice be in someone choosing? Because we've just said everybody, I mean,
Yeah, right.
everybody can get firearm safety. Now, your advice in selecting a firearm safety instructor.
So I think it's important to look at people who are confident with firearms themselves. So they should be able to handle firearms competently and confidently. They should be able to demonstrate shooting competently. They should have an air about them that they really know what they're talking about and not just throwing words at you, drill sergeant style, absorb it all, blah, blah, blah. They need to be able to look at you and understand what they're saying to give it to you in a way that you're going to understand it. That's very, very important. Another thing that I think that I personally appreciate is someone who is calm and controlled. You don't need to be hyped up, crazy, excited, whatever, to be a great instructor. Those are qualities that are certainly valuable in some situations. But when we're talking about learning how to shoot and learning how to be safe with a firearm, someone who's going to be able to talk you through everything and be calm and have a good sense of control of the situation is someone that you're going to be able to learn a lot from. And you can always take these steps later on to go to more, aggressive style training or CCW training, whatever it is that you're looking for to accomplish with your rifle, pistol, shotgun. But that initial instruction should come from somebody who's confident, controlled, and ideally calm, who's going to be able to help. You're just going to walk into the room and know, yeah, I'm going to learn a lot. And this person's going to give me all of the tools I need to succeed.
That's so important. I remember why I chose John Z that I met at the range. The range I was going to had no times when I could learn. There were no special classes, and there were small range, but he was standing there. He's standing and joking with the guys at the front counter, just this guy. And I'm kind of laughing because everyone's having a good time. And someone behind me and him walked in with a rifle. And I'm convinced he had eyes in the back of his head. He spun around and said, "Sir, would you kindly open that bolt so I know it's not loaded?" Mm-hmm. And I thought a guy that could have that type of lightheartedness and immediately be focused, and he wasn't mean or anything else, just a focus, strong and confident response. I want him to teach me. I went, that's the guy. And we've become great friends since then. And I've gotten to help him build up his dream as well. We'll put links below on that. That was an example for me. That was, when you mention it, I want that person to teach me. They have a quote in the samurai warrior world. When I was training in Aikido, they use long swords too. And they go, one of the ways of evaluating a powerful samurai is the depth of his laughter. Because full commitment and laughter that could also be wielded in other ways tells you something about the character. And,
that's cool.
And that was something I always remembered from it. And I think John had it for me. A good teacher's commitment is you understand it and they explain it till you understand it. Right. And they may have to change how they explain it for you to understand it. I guess an entertainer is just spraying it out there.
Right.
To take it or leave it.
Yeah. I've had the pleasure of working with some new shooters in my time. And it's funny, they're sponges. Everybody, they're just learning so much. It's very easy to make the assumption that safety has been just learned. And after that initial talk, and it's one and done kind of thing. So it doesn't matter if it's young children or someone that you're teaching to shoot or someone more experienced. It's something that needs to be reoccurring and over again, just because it's a habit. It needs to be some sort of habit that we all do. And it's interesting to me that, a lot of people will just say, oh, I know the safety rules. I learned them when I went to my first class. Well, do you know them now? If you don't know them now, you need to know them now, because the best way to learn to be good at something is to be able to teach it eventually. And so through that understanding, you should be able to learn as much as you can and get that core basic down. And that starts with firearm safety.
Excellent. That's great. And so we've covered that. Now, the next topic I'd love to cover is what got you into this? Because you're an inspiration to all of us.
Oh,
and
thanks.
I think you're an excellent instructor. I'm so grateful for your your LinkedIn profiles. I mean, that's one of the important things, is to understand and get to meet us, because if someone doesn't like firearms, they always find the person we wouldn't like either. And we would probably be reprimanding that they try to interview. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you've been an excellent model. Tell a little bit about your background getting into this.
Sure. Well, I started competing when I was 14 years old in the shooting sports and action shooting sports. But even before that, I was daddy's girl. So I went to the range with him whenever I could when I was little. And I worked with him as a range officer. So most of the time that meant just picking up brass and pasting targets or writing down scores on a clipboard before there was even computerized scoring. I'm dating myself. And all of that, until eventually I took a range officer course and started to run shooters through competition. And then I decided to start competing when I was 14. I figured I had enough on the sidelines, watching from the bird's eye view of the best of the best doing what they needed to do, that I wanted to try it too. And I fell in love with competing. I've always been naturally competitive, so it was something that I really enjoyed. But I think that the way that I learned and got into shooting was special because it started out in the basis of learning how to be safe on the range, administering the rules as a range officer. And then one quality that not a lot of people know, but my dad was a teacher. And so he had that natural kind of way to teach things and encourage people. He was a band director. So he paid attention to a lot of little details to get the best out of his students. And I think that trickled down through his, teaching of me how to shoot and us working together, so that it's something that I've been able to be successful in, not just, my performance on the range, but being able to share that with others to help them, get to the level that they want to.
One of the stories that I remember of I had an assistant that taught yoga who grew up with brothers, but they never let her get out and learn about firearms.
Oh.
And I know. And so I had John do a special class for some business people on firearm safety and shooting at a range. And I just remember we talked about it, and we talked about also if she would want to use one or not for personal protection. And it was real clear that she was not interested in using it for personal protection. And that experience changed her life, because she was now able to do something that the boys did and know about it, but still chose a path of not getting involved. She's one of these people that said, well, if I had for personal protection, could I wing them? And I said, no, that's not the right attitude. It's okay to learn and choose not to follow it. It's okay to not do it. And that's just as important. And I think you've been an advocate where some people you go, it's okay. There are other hobbies or other interests. There are other ways to protect yourself. This is not the only one. But how even today, if I talked to her, she would mention how it was life-changing for her, because it was like it had an empowerment experience for her that has rippled through other things in her life. And I think that's fascinating to see, especially if you grew up where it was like you didn't know, you didn't understand it. I know for me, it's been a wonderful piece of focus, attention, safety. I transfers to other areas of my life as well.
Absolutely.
Anything else you'd like to share before we wrap it up?
Oh, no, I think you've actually covered everything. I think one thing I will say that is, if you have tried shooting before and you didn't like it, think of when you were a little kid and you had to try something you didn't like. Right. And later on, in a different experience, in a different setting, in a different recipe, you may like it. So shooting is a lot like that, a lot like many things in life. So even if it wasn't so great the first time, don't be afraid to try it again.
I think that's great advice. Thank you for your time. And I do want to say I'll put links below of all your resources. I appreciate all the lives that you're helping to enhance the hobby and be safe with firearms and understand it, and really appreciate such an empowering and wonderful experience and hobby that we have here.
Well, I appreciate you being on and sharing such an important message.
What's the best way for people to reach you?
Best way to reach me is through my website, juliegolob.com, JULIEGOLOB.com.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
Thank you.